It was a bright morning when the billionaire father decided to spend some time with his little daughter. He was a man everyone knew for his wealth, his power, and the endless meetings that filled his life. His name often appeared in newspapers, but his heart was rarely in the place where it truly mattered beside his daughter. That morning, however, he promised himself he would take her out for breakfast, just the two of them. The driver brought them to a small diner in the city, a place far away from the luxury restaurants he usually visited. His daughter had begged him the night before to go somewhere simple, somewhere fun, and for once, he gave in to her request. The diner was cozy, filled with the smell of fresh coffee and baked bread. The chairs were a little old, the tables had scratches from years of use, but there was a warm feeling in the air. Here the father sat down with his daughter at a corner table. She was a bright little girl with soft hair tied in a ponytail, holding tightly to her favorite toy. That toy, a small stuffed bear, was more than just fabric and cotton to her. It was her comfort, her best friend, the thing she carried everywhere. Even in their mansion filled with expensive things, she never let go of that simple toy. As they waited for their food, the father was busy with his phone. His fingers tapped quickly on the screen, answering emails, checking stock updates, and responding to business partners. He told himself he was spending time with his daughter, but in truth, his mind was still trapped in the world of numbers and deals. Across the table, his little girl was humming softly, playing with her toy, talking to it as if it were alive. She tried to catch her father's attention, but he only nodded absent-mindedly, his eyes fixed on his glowing screen. Then it happened. The toy slipped from her small hands and tumbled onto the floor. She gasped softly and leaned down to pick it up, but it had rolled under the table, out of her reach. She stretched her little arms, trying again and again, but she couldn't grab it. Her face began to change. The smile faded, her lower lip trembled, and her eyes grew shiny. With tears, that bear was her whole world, and losing it even for a moment felt like her heart was breaking. She looked toward her father, hoping he would notice. But he was still lost in the world inside his phone. The little girl's shoulders shook as she tried to hold back her tears. She whispered softly, "Papa," but her voice was too small against the sound of clinking dishes and the chatter of other customers. To her, it felt like she was all alone. At that exact moment, a waitress passing by noticed her. She was a young woman in a simple uniform, holding a tray of steaming coffee cups. She saw the sadness on the girl's face and immediately paused. With gentle eyes, she bent down and peeked under the table. There it was, the stuffed bear lying near the chair leg, forgotten by everyone except the little girl. The waitress carefully put down her tray on a nearby counter and crouched down. She reached under the table, picked up the bear, and brushed it off with her hand. Then she looked at the little girl and gave her the warmest smile. "You go, sweetheart," she said softly, placing the toy back into the girl's arms. The child grabbed it tightly and hugged it against her chest, as if she had just found something precious she thought was gone forever. But the waitress didn't stop there. She could see the tears still shimmering in the little girl's eyes. Without thinking twice, she opened her arms and gave her a gentle hug. It was not the quick, distracted kind of hug people sometimes give. It was a real embrace, full of kindness, as if to say, "You're safe, you're loved, and everything is okay." The little girl melted into that hug. She felt warmth, comfort, and care. Her tiny sobs turned into quiet sniffles, and then, almost magically, into a smile. She looked up at the waitress with gratitude shining in her eyes. For that moment, the toy was not the only thing that mattered. The hug itself filled the emptiness she had felt inside. Across the table, the billionaire father finally looked up. He had been about to answer another email, but something caught his eye. He saw his daughter, not crying, but smiling in the arms of a stranger. His heart skipped a beat. He stared, almost confused, as if he had forgotten how to process what he was seeing. His daughter's happiness was not coming from him. It was coming from someone else. The scene unfolded slowly before him. The waitress, with no reason to care, had stopped her work just to comfort his child. She was not rich, not powerful, not someone with a grand title. She was just an ordinary worker in a small diner, yet in that simple act of kindness she gave his daughter something he had failed to give her in that moment, attention. warmth, and love. The father's chest tightened as he watched. He realized how close he had come to missing this moment. He realized how easily his daughter's sadness could have been overlooked, just like he had overlooked so many of her small joys and sorrows before. But here was this waitress filling the space he should have filled with nothing more than compassion. The little girl pulled back from the hug, her cheeks glowing again with happiness. She clutched her toy tightly and giggled softly, her sadness forgotten. The waitress patted her gently on the shoulder and whispered something that made her laugh. Then, with another smile, she stood up and returned to her work as if nothing special had happened. To the father, it was not nothing. It was everything. He sat there staring at his daughter, who now looked at her toy with bright eyes again. For the first time in a long time, he put his phone down completely and slipped it into his pocket. His gaze lingered on the waitress as she moved between tables, carrying plates and refilling cups, her smile never fading. The diner buzzed with life again, but for the father, the world had grown quiet. That small hug had spoken louder than any words, louder than any business deal or financial success he had ever achieved. In that single moment, something began to change inside him. He reached across the table and brushed a strand of hair from his daughter's face. She looked at him and grinned, her eyes sparkling again. He smiled back, but in his heart, he carried a strange mix of emotions: gratitude, guilt, and something he couldn't yet name. All he knew was that this morning, in a simple diner, he had witnessed something far more powerful than wealth, and it had started with nothing more than a dropped toy, kind stranger, and a hug. The father sat there for a long moment, his eyes fixed on his daughter, who was still hugging her toy with joy. The smile on her face was like sunshine, so bright and pure that it made the whole diner seem different. He could not believe how quickly her sadness had disappeared, not because of him, but because of the waitress. A simple hug, given without hesitation, had transformed her tears into laughter. He felt a strange heaviness in his chest, something he had not allowed himself to feel for years. It was almost like guilt mixed with tenderness, a reminder that money could never replace the gentle touch of love. He leaned back in his chair, his phone resting silently in his pocket now. For once, the endless buzzing of notifications and the pressure of business deals did not feel urgent. He only saw his daughter, small and innocent, clutching her toy like it was the most valuable treasure in the world. She looked up at him, her eyes glowing with happiness, and he wondered why it had taken the kindness of a stranger to bring out that glow. He thought about his life. Every day was the same: meetings, travel, phone calls, investments, and more deals. His calendar was always full, his office lights never switched off until late at night. He had convinced himself that he was doing all of this for his daughter, to give her everything she could ever want. But in that moment, sitting in the small diner, he realized he had been giving her everything except what she truly needed: his presence, his time, his attention. He felt a sharp sting of regret. How many times had she called for him when he was too busy typing on his laptop? How many times had she wanted to show him her drawings, her little victories, her stories, but he had nodded without really listening. He thought he was being a good father by providing luxury, by surrounding her with the finest clothes, toys, and even tutors. But watching her giggle because of one small hug made him question everything he had believed. His eyes followed the waitress as she walked back to her work. She moved quickly between tables, carrying trays and refilling cups with coffee. Her smile was still there, the same gentle one she had shown his daughter. She did not even realize the effect she had made, the lesson she had given without speaking a word. To her, it was probably just a small act of kindness. But to him, it was like a mirror showing him the emptiness in his own heart. He glanced back at his daughter. She was talking to her toy again, making up little stories in a soft voice. He noticed the way she laughed, the way she swung her legs. Under the table, the way her whole world seemed so simple and beautiful. And he wondered, when had he stopped seeing these things? When had he become so blind that he needed a stranger to remind him of the sweetness of his own child? His mind drifted to his own childhood. He remembered his father, a man who had also been busy with work, always running after money and success. He remembered how he used to sit by the window, waiting for his father to come home, just for a few minutes of play or a bedtime story. Sometimes he waited until his eyes grew heavy and he would fall asleep before his father arrived. He had promised himself back then that he would never make his own child feel the same loneliness. Yet here he was, repeating the very same pattern. The thought shook him, took a deep breath and looked around the diner. Families were sitting together, talking, laughing, sharing meals. None of them looked as rich as him, but there was something in their eyes, something he envied in that moment. They had connection, they had warmth, they were rich in a way money could never buy. His gaze returned to the waitress once more. She was leaning slightly to listen to an elderly couple, nodding with patience as she wrote down their order. There was no tiredness in her smile, even though her job looked exhausting. He realized that this woman, who earned in a year less than he made in a day, had something he was desperately missing: an open heart, the ability to give love freely. And his daughter had felt it instantly. The father touched the edge of the table, his fingers tapping slowly, most unsettled, because deep inside, he knew he was standing at a crossroad. He could continue his life the way it was, busy, powerful, and distant, or he could change. But change was not easy for a man who had built walls around himself for so long. He lowered his eyes to his daughter again. She noticed his gaze and grinned at him, showing the small gap between her front teeth. "Papa, look. Teddy is happy again," she said, holding up her toy. Her voice was filled with innocence, without any complaint that he hadn't noticed her sadness before. She did not blame him. She simply wanted him to share her joy. Something melted inside him at those words. He reached out and brushed his hand gently over her hair. "Yes, Teddy looks very happy," he said softly, his voice almost breaking. But deep inside, he was speaking not just about the toy, but about her. As the minutes passed, the weight of the scene grew heavier in his heart. He could not stop replaying it in his mind, his daughter's tears, the waitress's hug, the sudden change from sadness to laughter. It was such a small moment, but it carried a meaning larger than any business empire he had built. He realized that true power was not in signing contracts worth millions. True power was in being able to wipe away his daughter's tears, to make her feel safe and loved. And he had failed at that. He leaned back and let out a long sigh. For the first time in many years, he felt vulnerable, human, and flawed. Yet at the same time, he felt a spark of hope, because maybe it was not too late. Maybe he could still learn. Maybe he could still give his daughter what she truly needed. The waitress returned to their table to check if they needed anything. The father looked at her closely this time, not as a worker serving him food, but as a person who had unknowingly given him a priceless gift. He felt an urge to thank her, not just with words, but with something deeper. But for now he stayed quiet. He only watched as she poured water into their glasses and gave his daughter another smile. Then she moved away again, leaving behind a silence filled with unspoken lessons. The father sat in that silence, his heart stirred in a way he had not experienced in years. He looked at his daughter again, this time with new eyes. Her laughter was music, her small hands were treasures, her very presence was a blessing. He promised himself quietly that he would never again let his phone or his business steal these moments from him. He had been given a wake-up call, not from wealth or power, but from the simple hug of a waitress. That single act had touched him more deeply than anything else in recent memory. And though he did not yet know how, he felt a strong desire growing inside him to change, to become better, and to truly be the father his little girl deserved. When the plates of food finally arrived, the billionaire father was no longer lost in his phone. He pushed it aside and gave his full attention to the moment. The waitress placed a plate of pancakes in front of his daughter, her favorite, with extra syrup and strawberries on top. The little girl clapped her hands in delight, thanking the waitress with a wide smile. The father noticed how the waitress leaned down just slightly to make sure the plate was in reach for the small child, and how she whispered something playful that made his daughter giggle before running off to the next table. The father sat there quietly, watching. He couldn't take his eyes off the waitress. Something about her presence lingered in his mind. She had already shown more care to his daughter in a few seconds than he himself had managed that morning. And it wasn't just about picking up the toy, it was the way she had looked at his daughter, the way she had hugged her as though she truly mattered. It had not been a duty, it had been genuine kindness. He found himself curious. Who was this woman? Why did she seem to care so much? Even about strangers? His daughter munched happily on her pancakes, completely content again, but his thoughts were restless. When the waitress returned to check on them, he decided to speak. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight. The waitress looked at him, slightly surprised. "For what, sir?" she asked politely, though her smile remained. "For earlier," he explained, nodding toward his daughter. "You comforted her when she was upset. You didn't have to, but you did." Waitress's eyes softened, and she shook her head gently. "She's just a little girl. She needed someone in that moment." "Any of us would do the same," she replied. But the father could sense there was more behind her words. He looked at her more closely. Her uniform was neat but slightly worn. Her shoes looked tired from hours of walking, and her eyes, though kind, carried a hint of exhaustion. She did not look like someone who had an easy life, yet her smile was strong. Almost as if she carried her strength not for herself, but for others. "You have children?" he asked suddenly, curious about where her kindness came from. The waitress hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, a little boy, 6. He's everything to me." She said it simply, but there was a spark in her eyes when she mentioned him, a spark of love and pride that no exhaustion could hide. The father leaned back, listening carefully. She continued, her voice soft, almost like she was speaking to herself rather than him. "I work double shifts most days, sometimes 3 jobs at once, just to make sure he has what he needs. It's not easy, but when I see him smile, when I hear him laugh, it feels worth it. Children don't care about money or big houses, just want love, attention, and a parent who's there for them." Her words hit the father like a quiet thunder. He glanced at his daughter, who was busy cutting her pancakes into funny shapes, completely unaware of the conversation. He swallowed hard, realizing the irony. This woman, who barely earned enough to survive, understood more about love and parenting than he, a billionaire, ever had. He asked carefully, "And how do you manage? Working so much and still being there for your son?" The waitress gave a small laugh, though it wasn't without pain. "I don't sleep much. I skip things for myself, but I never skip time with him. Even if it's just a few minutes before bed, I make sure he feels loved. Because one day he'll grow up, and I don't want him to remember me as the mother who was always too busy." She paused, then added softly, "He deserves the best of me, even if I have nothing else to give." The father felt his throat tighten. The waitress's simple words carried more wisdom than the hundreds of books on success he had read, more truth than all the speeches he had given about ambition and wealth. Here was a woman with no riches, no grand mansion, no powerful connections, yet she possessed the very thing he was searching for, ability to give love unconditionally. His daughter suddenly interrupted his thoughts. "Papa, taste this. It's so yummy," she said, holding out a forkful of pancake toward him. He leaned forward and tasted it, smiling at her excitement. The waitress watched them for a moment, her smile growing warmer, and then she excused herself to attend to another table. But the father couldn't let her story go. He thought about her words long after she walked away. He thought about how hard she worked, how much she sacrificed, and how deeply she loved her son. She was a stranger, yet in a few sentences she had shown him a truth he had been avoiding all his life. He realized something important: wealth had always been his shield. Whenever he felt guilty about missing time with his daughter, he covered it with gifts, another toy, another trip, another expensive tutor. He believed money could fill the spaces his absence created. But the waitress's words stripped away that illusion. Children don't care about money. They care about presence. They care about love. As he sat there, lost in thought, he remembered again his own childhood, those long nights of waiting for his father to come home. He remembered promising himself that he would never let his child feel forgotten. Yet here he was, repeating the same mistake. The difference was, he had no excuse.
Guys.
Unlike his father, he had enough money to never work another day in his life. But he still chose work over moments with his daughter. The food on his plate grew cold as he stared at his little girl. She was laughing now, playing with the strawberries on her plate, making them talk to her toy bear. She looked so happy in her small world. And yet he realized she was happy not because of him, but because of the kindness of a stranger and the company of her toy. That realization broke him quietly inside. When the waitress returned again with the check, the father stopped her. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She seemed surprised by the question. "Claire," she said with a polite smile. "Claire," he repeated, as if wanting to remember it. "Thank you, not just for today, but for what you said. You've given me something I didn't even know I needed." Claire looked at him curiously, then glanced at his daughter, who was busy licking syrup from her fingers. "She's a beautiful little girl," Claire said warmly. "You're lucky to have her. Don't forget to enjoy these years. They pass faster than you think." With that, she walked away again, leaving the father staring at her words like they were written in the air. "Don't forget to enjoy these years." He repeated them in his mind again and again. They struck him harder than any business failure, harder than any financial loss could have. The billionaire father sat there, humbled by a waitress named Claire, realized that in the quiet corners of life, wisdom often comes not from the powerful, but from those who live with love, despite hardship. And as he held his daughter's small hand while she finished her meal, he knew something inside him had begun to change forever. When the father left the diner with his daughter that morning, his heart was not the same as when he had walked in. He held her small hand tightly as they crossed the street to where the car was waiting, but his mind was still back at that little corner table, replaying the scene over and over again. The hug, the words of the waitress, the light in his daughter's eyes when she felt cared for. These moments stayed with him like a shadow he could not shake off. That night, after putting his daughter to bed, he sat in his large study. The room was filled with polished wood, bookshelves, and expensive paintings, yet it all felt strangely empty. His phone lay silent on the desk. For the first time in years, he ignored the dozens of emails waiting for him. Instead, his mind wandered to Claire the waitress with the tired eyes but a heart full of love. He remembered every word she had spoken, how she had said children only want time and affection, not wealth. He thought of her son, a little boy of 6, and how she worked herself to exhaustion just to make sure he had a future. The billionaire father was not a man who easily felt small, but that night he felt humbled. In all his life, with all his wealth, he had never shown that kind of sacrifice or devotion. His daughter had everything money could buy, but what about the things money could not buy? Did she feel as loved as Claire's son surely did? Did she feel her father's presence or just his absence? The questions troubled him deeply. The next morning, instead of heading to his office, he returned to the diner. His driver looked surprised, but followed his instructions. The diner was busy, filled with the smell of breakfast and the chatter of customers. And there she was, moving from table to table, balancing plates and coffee pots with her steady hands. Claire, she looked the same as yesterday, tired but smiling, graceful even in her worn uniform. He took a seat in a quiet corner and waited until she came over. She greeted him politely, though there was a flicker of recognition in her eyes. "Back again?" she asked lightly. "Yes," he said, his voice steady, but carrying a hint of something deeper. "And this time I wanted to talk." Claire raised her eyebrows but nodded, setting down a menu. "What about?" The father hesitated. He was not used to opening up, not used to lowering the walls he had built around himself. But something inside him pushed forward. "Yesterday, you helped my daughter more than I did. You hugged her when she needed comfort, and I realized something. I've been giving her everything except the most important thing, my time." Claire listened quietly, her expression calm but kind. He continued, his words almost spilling out. "You said children don't care about money, and you're right. I've been blind to that. I thought I was being a good father by surrounding her with wealth, but now I see I was wrong." There was a long pause before Claire spoke. "At least you realized it," she said softly. "Most people never do." Her words gave him courage. He leaned forward slightly. Claire, may I ask you something personal? I don't mean to intrude, but you manage everything? Raising your son alone, working so hard, doesn't it ever break you? Claire gave a small smile, though her eyes revealed the struggle behind it. Of course it does. There are days when I feel like I can't keep going. Then I look at my boy and I remember why I'm doing it. He deserves a chance at life, a better one than I had. That thought keeps me standing. Her voice trembled just slightly, and the father felt a heaviness in his chest. He realized she was carrying the kind of weight he could never imagine. She worked for every dollar, every meal, every dream, and yet she gave love so freely, without bitterness. He made a decision in that moment, a quiet, personal decision that came straight from his heart. He wanted to help her, not out of pity, but out of respect. He wanted to ease her burden too. Give back some of the kindness she had unknowingly given him. But he also knew she was a proud woman. He couldn't just throw money at her. She would never accept it that way. He would have to find another way, a way that honored her dignity. Over the next few days, he used his resources quietly. He had his assistants research Claire's situation carefully, but discreetly. He found out where she lived, a modest apartment in a neighborhood that was far from safe. He learned that her son attended a local school, but struggled because she couldn't afford better materials or opportunities for him. She worked long shifts at the diner and sometimes cleaned houses on weekends just to keep up with rent and bills. She had no savings, no support system, just her own determination. The father felt a mix of sadness and admiration. This woman was a warrior, and she had no idea how much strength she carried. He remembered how she had said she skipped things for herself just to give to her son. It made him realize that love was not measured in gifts but in sacrifices. One evening, he sat in his office and called a private meeting with his financial advisor. "I want to set up an anonymous scholarship fund," he said. "It should cover school fees, supplies, and future education for a child." The child's name as he paused, then gave Claire's son's name. "Make sure it's handled discreetly. She must not know it came from me." His advisor raised an eyebrow but nodded. The billionaire father then added, "Also find a way to improve her living situation. Quietly. Maybe through community programs or a housing opportunity. Whatever it takes, but do it with respect." When the arrangements were finally made, the father felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He was not helping her to ease his guilt or to show off his wealth. He was doing it because her kindness had touched him so deeply that he wanted to give back. Days later, Claire came to the diner with a strange glow on her face. The father had returned again with his daughter, and when she came to their table, she seemed almost overwhelmed with emotion. "Something incredible happened," she said softly, as though speaking to herself. "My son's school called. They told me his fees had been covered, all of them, even extra classes. I don't understand how, but it feels like a miracle." Her eyes were bright with tears, though she blinked them back quickly. She smiled at the father, not knowing he was the one behind it. "It feels like someone out there is watching over us," she said with a soft laugh. The father only nodded, his throat tight. "Sometimes good things come when you least expect them," he replied, careful to hide the truth. He watched as Claire walked away, her steps lighter than before. Her shoulders no longer bent under the same invisible weight, and in his heart, he knew he had done the right thing. For once, his money had not been used to buy luxury or more power. It had been used to give someone hope, as he sat there with his daughter. Listening to her chatter about school and toys, he felt something shift inside him. He realized that helping Claire was not just about her hit, was also about him. It was about breaking free from the cage of his own wealth, about learning that kindness and love were worth more than gold. And as his daughter laughed, holding her toy bear close, he reached out and hugged her. This time, the hug was not distracted or hurried. It was full and real, just like the one she had received from Claire. For the first time, he felt like he was learning how to be a father. Claire sat in her small apartment one evening, staring at the letter she had received from her son's school. Her hands trembled slightly as she read the words again and again, almost afraid that the miracle written there would vanish if she blinked too long. Her son's school fees had been paid in full, not just for the current year, but for years ahead. There was also mention of additional opportunities, extra classes, sources, and even a chance for him to join activities she could never afford before. It felt unreal. She pressed the letter to her chest, tears filling her eyes. For so long, every day had been a struggle, every night a worry about tomorrow. And suddenly, a burden that had weighed on her for years was lifted. Her son, sitting on the floor with his little toy cars, noticed her expression. "Mom, why are you crying?" he asked in his innocent voice. She quickly wiped her tears and smiled at him. "I'm not crying, sweetheart. I'm happy. Something very good has happened for us." He tilted his head, not fully understanding, but he smiled back because her smile was enough for him. She walked over, knelt beside him, and hugged him. Tightly, "You're going to have so many new chances now," she whispered. "The world is opening up for you." Claire didn't know who had done this for her. The school had only said it was through a special program, anonymous donors who wanted to help families in need. She didn't ask questions. She only prayed with gratitude in her heart. Meanwhile, the billionaire father carried the secret quietly. He never told her it was him. He didn't want recognition or thanks. For once in his life, he had done something not for his own pride, but for the sake of kindness itself. Every time he saw Claire in the diner, serving tables with that same smile, he felt a quiet warmth inside, knowing that behind her eyes there was a little less worry now, and a little more hope. But the change was not just in her life. The real transformation was happening in him. His daughter noticed it first. Started putting his phone away whenever they were together. Began reading her bedtime stories, sitting by her bed until she fell asleep. He asked her about her day, about her drawings, about her little dreams, and listened as if those were the most important things in the world. She would laugh and chatter endlessly, her eyes shining with joy. And he realized he was hearing sounds he had almost forgotten the sweet, musical laughter of his child, unbroken by sadness or loneliness. He also began to spend more time at home. His assistants were shocked when he canceled meetings, postponed deals, and refused late-night calls. He told them simply, "My daughter comes first now." Some of them didn't understand, but he didn't care. For the first time, he understood what it meant to truly be a father, not just a provider. The change in him was so clear that even his daughter noticed. One evening, while they were building a puzzle together on the living room floor, she looked at him with her big eyes and said, "Papa, you smile more now?" He paused, surprised by her words, then laughed softly. "Do I?" She nodded seriously. "Yes. Before you were always busy. Now you're here. I like this papa better." Her words pierced his heart with both joy and sadness. Joy, because she felt his love now. Sadness, because he realized how much time he had already lost. But he promised himself he would not waste another moment. He hugged her close and whispered, "This papa is here to stay." Claire, on the other hand, felt her own world shifting. With the burden of school fees gone, she found herself with more energy, more hope. She still worked hard, but now when she came home to her son, she carried less worry and more peace. She started dreaming again, something she had stopped doing years ago. Maybe she could go back to school herself one day. Maybe she could open a small bakery like she had once imagined. She didn't know who had given her this chance, but she carried gratitude like a light in her heart. One day, as fate would have it, Claire and the billionaire father found themselves talking again in the diner. His daughter was with him, happily drawing with crayons on a napkin while they waited for their food. Claire stopped by to check on them, and he asked gently, "How is your son?" Her eyes lit up immediately. "He's doing so well, you wouldn't believe it. He came home yesterday with a certificate from school. He's so proud of himself. And for the first time, I don't have to worry about pulling him out because of money. It feels like a dream." The father smiled, though he kept his secret. "That's wonderful," he said. "He's lucky to have you." "No," Claire replied softly, shaking her head. "I'm lucky to have him. He's my reason to keep going." Her words stayed with him long after he left the diner. They reminded him that love was not about what you give in material things, but what you give from your heart. Weeks turned into months, and the bond between the father and his daughter grew stronger than ever. He took her to the park where they flew kites and laughed together. He sat with her at tea parties with her stuffed toys, letting her pour him imaginary tea and offering pretend cookies. He even learned to braid her hair, though his clumsy fingers made her giggle endlessly. These were moments money could never buy. They filled his heart in ways no business success ever had. One afternoon, as they walked hand in hand through the park, his daughter stopped suddenly and looked up at him. "Papa, do you know why Teddy is happy now?" she asked, holding up her toy bear. He smiled and asked, "Why?" "Why," she whispered, "because you hug me more now." Teddy says hugs make everything better. The father's eyes grew wet, and he lifted her into his arms, hugging her tightly. "Teddy's very smart," he whispered back. That evening, after putting her to bed, he sat by her side longer than usual, watching her sleep peacefully. He thought of how close he had come to missing all of this, if it hadn't been for Claire. For her simple hug to his daughter, maybe he would still be trapped in his cold, busy world, blind to what truly mattered. He realized that sometimes life sends you teachers in the most unexpected forms. For him, it wasn't another billionaire, or a business mentor, or a famous author. It was a waitress in a small diner who had shown more wealth in her heart than he had ever shown with his billions, and so he carried that lesson forward. He continued to quietly support Claire and her son, making sure they had opportunities without ever revealing his hand. But more importantly, he changed himself for his daughter. For the promise he had made silently to her and to himself, he understood now that true wealth was not measured by the money in his bank account, but by the love in his home, the laughter of his daughter, and the kindness he could share with others. And all of it began with a small toy falling to the floor, a waitress bending down to help, and a hug that reminded him what life was truly about. That simple moment had rewritten his story forever.